Go get your tea, go get your coffee. The café stood on a narrow street where the rain always seemed to arrive earlier than the weather forecast promised. It was the kind of small British café people noticed only after they had already walked past it 3 or 4 times. The windows were slightly foggy during winter mornings. The wooden sign above the door had lost some of its paint, and one of the chairs outside leaned awkwardly to one side as if it had given up on life years ago. Still, every morning before 7, the lights came on, the coffee machine began its low mechanical breathing, and the smell of fresh bread slowly escaped into the cold air. Martha opened the café 6 days a week. She was 48 years old and had reached that quiet stage in life where people stop asking what your dreams are because they assume you have either achieved them or buried them somewhere, deep enough not to mention them again. Her dark coat always smelled faintly of roasted coffee beans and winter air. Her hair, once carefully dyed every month, had slowly surrendered to natural silver strands she no longer had the energy to fight. Most customers thought she looked calm. They were wrong. Inside her mind, thoughts moved constantly, like trains arriving late at different platforms. Bills, rent, her son who barely answered messages, her mother's hospital appointments, the leaking pipe upstairs, the electricity prices, the fear that one bad month could destroy everything she had spent 12 exhausting years building. But none of that appeared on her face. At 6:45 every morning, she unlocked the door, switched on the soft yellow lights, placed pastries inside the glass display, and prepared herself to greet strangers as though she had slept peacefully for 8 uninterrupted hours. Human beings are fascinating creatures. They can carry entire storms inside their chest while politely asking someone whether they would like oat milk or semi-skimmed. Civilization survives because exhausted people continue pretending they are completely fine. The first customer always arrived at exactly 7:10. An older man named Leonard entered every morning wearing the same long grey scarf, regardless of the season. Nobody knew much about him, except that he lived alone and read newspapers from beginning to end, including sections nobody else touched anymore. "Morning, Martha," he said softly. "The usual? If the world hasn't ended overnight." "Not yet." "That's disappointing." She smiled while preparing his tea. Leonard liked strong English breakfast tea with 1 sugar and a small splash of milk. He always sat beside the window, folded his umbrella carefully, and stared outside as if waiting for somebody who had forgotten him years ago. After him came the office workers, people in expensive coats carrying stress in designer handbags. Young professionals speaking loudly about meetings, deadlines, cancelled trains, impossible managers, impossible clients, impossible lives. Every morning they rushed inside with wet shoes and impatient eyes. Large latte. Flat white. Oat cappuccino. Can I get that extra hot? Can I get that faster? Can I get 2 croissants? Can I charge my phone? Can I sit there? Can I have the Wi-Fi password? Martha moved constantly behind the counter. Steam rose around her face. Cups touched saucers. Milk hissed loudly beneath the metal wand. Coins dropped into the till. Rain tapped against the windows. And every few minutes she repeated the same sentence. Go get your tea. Go get your coffee. Simple words. Tiny words. Words nobody remembered 5 minutes later. Still, she said them hundreds of times every week. One Thursday morning in November, somebody new entered the café. He looked around 35, perhaps older, though tiredness often confuses age. He wore a dark green coat soaked with rain and carried a small backpack that seemed too light for somebody traveling far and too heavy for somebody simply going to work. His face had that distant expression people wear after losing something important. Not dramatic grief. Not visible heartbreak. Just emptiness. The quiet kind. He stood near the counter for several seconds studying the menu, although the menu was painfully simple. Coffee, tea, soup, sandwiches, cake. Humanity pretending complexity while surviving mostly on caffeine and emotional damage. What can I get you? Martha asked. The man blinked slightly, as though returning from another place. Black coffee, please. Eat anything? No, thank you. You sure? He hesitated. Then he nodded once. A slice of lemon cake. Sit wherever you like. He paid in cash, took the small receipt carefully, then sat near the back wall beside the bookshelf nobody used anymore. Martha placed the coffee and cake on a tray. Go get your coffee. He looked at her for a second longer than most customers did. Not in a strange way. More like somebody hearing a familiar phrase after many years. Thank you, he said quietly. For the next week, he returned every morning. Always black coffee. Always lemon cake. Always the same table. He rarely used his phone and never opened a laptop. Sometimes he stared outside for nearly 20 minutes without moving. Other times he wrote in a small notebook with slow, careful handwriting. Martha noticed him because he was different from the others. Most people entered cafes like soldiers entering battle. Fast, distracted, already mentally somewhere else. This man sat like somebody trying not to fall apart in public. One rainy afternoon, business became unusually slow. Leonard had already left. Office workers were trapped inside meetings, and the streets outside looked cold and colorless beneath the dark sky. The man remained at his table writing. Martha cleaned cups quietly before finally speaking. You write every day. He looked up. Sorry? The notebook. Oh. He closed it halfway. Just thoughts. That dangerous, is it? A faint smile appeared on his face for the first time. Sometimes. She leaned against the counter. You're not from around here. No. Work? Not exactly. The silence stretched comfortably between them. Then he surprised her. "Do you ever get tired of saying the same things every day?" She laughed softly. "All the time." "No, I mean really tired." Martha looked toward the coffee machine. "Yes." He nodded slowly, as though she had answered a much larger question. "My wife used to work in a café," he said after a moment. The sentence arrived gently, but carried enormous weight beneath it. Martha did not interrupt. "She used to come home smelling like coffee beans and cinnamon pastries. I remember that more clearly than her perfume." He stared at the table while speaking. "She died last year." Outside, rain continued falling steadily against the glass. Martha suddenly understood the sadness inside his face. Not all at once. Grief never reveals itself fully in one moment. But enough. "I'm sorry," she said quietly. She used to say something funny every morning before leaving for work. His voice weakened slightly. She'd point at the kettle and say, "Go get your tea," or "Go get your coffee," like it was some important mission. Martha swallowed carefully. She said, "People survive difficult lives through small routines. A cup of tea, warm socks, music in the kitchen, tiny things that stop the darkness becoming too heavy." Neither of them spoke for several seconds. Finally, Martha said, "She sounds clever." She was. He smiled again, though this time sadness remained visible beneath it. She believed ordinary moments mattered more than dramatic ones. The café suddenly felt warmer despite the weather outside. After that afternoon, their conversations became longer. His name was Elliot. He had worked as a history teacher before taking leave from work after his wife's death. He had spent months traveling across different towns without any clear reason, not searching for something specific, just trying to exist somewhere. His memories felt quieter. Grief does strange things to human beings. Some people cry loudly. Others become silent. Some throw away old photographs, while others sleep beside them. Many continue functioning perfectly in public, while privately feeling as though the world ended months ago and nobody noticed. Elliot belonged to the silent kind. Each morning he arrived at the café around 8:15. Martha would already know his order before he spoke. "Black coffee?" "Yes, please." "Lemon cake?" "Trying to ruin my health again?" "You're in Britain. That happens automatically." He laughed properly at that. A dangerous moment. Once people begin laughing again, they realize they are still alive. Then the difficult part begins. Continuing. December arrived with freezing mornings and streets covered in silver frost. Christmas lights appeared across shop windows, though many looked tired rather than festive. Songs about joy played endlessly inside supermarkets while exhausted parents calculated budgets in their heads. Humanity loves decorating stress with fairy lights. One evening, heavy snow began falling unexpectedly. Customers rushed home early, trains stopped working properly, buses disappeared, and the town slowly became quiet beneath the storm. Elliot remained inside the cafe long after sunset. "You'll get stranded if you stay much longer," Martha warned. "I've nowhere urgent to be." She understood that sentence too well. Around 7, the electricity flickered once before disappearing completely. The cafe fell into darkness. "Perfect," Martha sighed. "Exactly what I needed." Outside, snow continued covering the street in thick white silence. They lit candles from a small emergency drawer behind the counter. The cafe transformed instantly. Softer, older, almost timeless. Martha made tea using a gas camping stove she kept for emergencies. "Very glamorous," Elliot said. "You should see the 5-star service package. Comes with emotional breakdowns and burnt toast." He smiled while accepting the mug. The candlelight softened everything around them. The wooden tables, the bookshelves, the foggy windows. Even the exhaustion inside Martha's face looked gentler somehow. For the first time in months, Elliot began speaking openly. About hospitals. About sitting beside his wife during chemotherapy. About pretending to stay hopeful even when fear slowly entered every conversation. About the terrible loneliness people feel after funerals end and everyone else returns to normal life. "The strangest part," he admitted quietly, "is how the world continues exactly the same." Martha nodded slowly. "The buses still arrive late. People still complain about weather. Supermarkets still sell meal deals." "Yes. And you want to scream at everyone because somebody you love disappeared." He stared at her. "You understand. My husband left 15 years ago." Elliot remained silent. "He fell in love with somebody younger, more exciting, less tired." The words sounded calm now. Time had removed their sharpest edges. "I spent years angry about it. Then one day I realized something embarrassing." "What?" "He didn't destroy my life." She looked around the dark cafe. "Life simply became different from what I expected." Snow pressed softly against the windows outside. "I think people suffer twice," she continued quietly. "First, because painful things happen. Then, because reality refuses to become the version they imagined." Elliot lowered his eyes toward the steam rising from his tea. "My wife used to say something similar." Smart woman. She really was. The electricity returned an hour later, but neither moved immediately. Something important had shifted between them. Not romance, not cinematic destiny. Real life rarely behaves like films written by people who have never paid rent on time. It was simpler than that. Two lonely people recognizing each other honestly. Winter deepened. Regular customers continued arriving each morning. Leonard with his newspaper. Office workers with expensive stress. Students pretending energy drinks counted as nutrition. Young couples sharing pastries while silently checking their phones every 30 seconds like nervous laboratory mice trained by social media algorithms. And through all of it, Martha continued saying the same familiar words. Go get your tea. Go get your coffee. But now Elliot noticed what others missed. She never spoke mechanically. Every sentence carried warmth. A tired nurse received gentleness after a night shift. An anxious teenager received encouragement before exams. An elderly woman received patience while counting coins slowly from her purse. Tiny moments. Tiny kindnesses. Nothing dramatic, yet somehow important. One February morning, Leonard failed to arrive. At first, nobody worried. Older people sometimes disappeared for ordinary reasons. Hospital appointments, bad weather, broken boilers. Humanity becomes deeply fragile after 70 while stubbornly pretending otherwise. But when he still had not appeared 3 days later, Martha became concerned. She knew his address from emergency contact forms customers filled years earlier during a local business scheme nobody remembered anymore. After closing the cafe, she and Elliot walked through freezing rain toward Leonard's small flat. Nobody answered the door. Eventually, a neighbor opened it using a spare key. They found Leonard lying weakly on the sofa beneath several blankets. Severe flu, dehydration, no close family nearby. The old man looked embarrassed more than frightened. I meant to call someone, he muttered weakly. Men always say that right before collapsing, Martha replied. They brought groceries, medicines, soup, tea. Over the following weeks, they visited regularly until Leonard recovered fully. One afternoon, while drinking tea inside the cafe, Leonard looked at Elliot thoughtfully. You know why I come here every day? Habit? No. The old man glanced toward Martha behind the counter. Because loneliness becomes dangerous when nobody notices you missing. Silence settled heavily across the table. Then Leonard smiled gently. People think cafes sell coffee. What they really sell is temporary belonging. Elliot never forgot those words. Spring eventually arrived. The town changed color slowly. Trees regained leaves. Windows opened again. Rain smelled softer. People walked more slowly beneath warmer skies. And something unexpected happened inside Elliot. He began wanting things again. Not huge things, small things. Cooking properly instead of eating toast over the sink. Reading books without losing concentration after 3 pages. Sleeping before midnight. Answering messages from old friends. Living. One afternoon, he entered the cafe carrying flowers. Not romantic flowers, just ordinary yellow tulips from a supermarket. For the counter, he said awkwardly. Martha looked genuinely surprised. They're probably dying already. Perfect. Matches the furniture. She laughed loudly enough for several customers to look up. That laugh changed the entire room. Humans underestimate laughter. Entire friendships survive because somebody made another person laugh at exactly the right moment. Months passed. Summer arrived with crowded streets and open windows. Tourists occasionally wandered into the café, searching for authenticity, which usually means paying extra money for uncomfortable chairs and decorative plants. Civilization remains deeply confusing. Elliot returned to teaching part-time. Martha finally repaired the broken upstairs pipe. Leonard switched from tea to iced lemonade during hot afternoons while still complaining constantly about modern society. Life did not become perfect. Real stories rarely do. Some mornings, Martha still woke with anxiety pressing heavily against her chest. Some nights, Elliot still reached instinctively toward the empty side of his bed before remembering reality. Grief remained. So did exhaustion. But something else existed beside them now. Connection. One rainy evening near the end of August, the cafe became unusually busy. Cups clattered constantly. Conversations filled the air. Steam fogged every window. Martha moved quickly behind the counter. "Go get your tea. Go get your coffee. Careful, that plate's hot. Sugar's on the side. Mind the step." Elliot watched quietly from his usual table. Then suddenly, he understood why those simple words mattered so much. Go get your tea. Go get your coffee. It was never really about drinks. It meant keep going. Take warmth where you can find it. Sit down for 5 minutes. Rest. Survive today. Try again tomorrow. Human beings build entire emotional lives from tiny, repeated rituals. A familiar mug, the sound of rain against windows. Somebody remembering your usual order. Somebody noticing when you disappear. Maybe that is enough sometimes. Maybe that is more important than people realize. Near closing time, Martha finally sat opposite Elliot with visible exhaustion across her face. "You look dead," he said. "Probably am. You've said that every week for months. One day I'll be correct." Outside, evening rain covered the street in silver reflections. The cafe smelled of coffee, warm bread, and wet coats drying near radiators. Martha looked around quietly. "You know something strange?" "What?" "I used to think this place trapped me." Elliot waited. "But maybe it saved me too." He nodded slowly. "I think some places hold people together without them noticing." She smiled faintly. The lights reflected softly against the windows, while distant traffic moved through the rainy night outside. For a while, neither spoke. There was no need. The cafe remained warm against the cold city beyond the glass. And somewhere between grief, loneliness, tea stains, old newspapers, burnt toast, unpaid bills, tired conversations, winter storms, hospital memories, and thousands of ordinary cups of coffee, life had quietly continued. Not perfectly. Not magically. Just honestly. Which, in the end, is usually enough.